This is African American History is American History. Throughout the civil rights movement, there have been many unsung heroes, but few were as important or influential as political activist Ella Baker. She was truly the spine of the civil rights movement.
Until the killing of black men, black mothers' sons becomes as important to the rest of the country as the killing of a white mother's son, we who believe in freedom cannot rest.
Ella Josephine Baker was born in Norfolk, Virginia on December 13, 1903, and grew up in Littleton, North Carolina.
I was born in Norfolk, Virginia. I began school there, the first year of public school. When I was 7, the family shifted back to North Carolina. Both my parents came from North Carolina in Warren County. My mother had a feeling that there was greater culture in North Carolina than obtained in Norfolk, Virginia, plus the fact she just didn't like the lowland lying climate there.
Her grandmother was a big influence on her. She was a former slave, and young Ella would listen intently as she told her stories of what life was like, having no rights whatsoever, and to be physically owned by another human being. Her grandmother spoke of being beaten and whipped by her slave master because she defiantly refused to marry a man he had picked out for her, a man she didn't even know. This and many other equally painful stories of injustice stayed with Ella Baker her whole life.
I grew up in North Carolina, had my schooling through the college level in North Carolina.
In 1927, Ella graduated with a BA from Shaw University in North Carolina. An exceptional student, Ella was the valedictorian of her graduating class. After graduation, she moved to New York City, where she worked as a waitress to support herself. She became a community organizer and eventually landed a job as a journalist for the American West Indian News. In 1930, Ella became office manager for the Negro National News. That's where she met journalist George Schuyler, who would become her mentor. In 1930, during the Great Depression, Ella Baker and George Schuyler co-founded the Young Negroes Cooperative League, or YNCL. The goal of YNCL was to promote, organize, and educate the community about the economic advantages of pooling their funds in order to get better deals on goods and services.
I suppose that the first organized effort that might be considered something of civil rights was the Young Negroes Cooperative League.
Ella was the secretary-treasurer, and by 1931 became the national director. Ever the forward thinker, Ella saw the group as a way to, quote, prove to ourselves and others that the Negro can and will save himself from economic death. This is African American History is American History. In 1940, following the recommendation of George Schuyler, Ella became field secretary for the NAACP. She was also an advisor for the NAACP's New York Youth Council. By 1943, she was appointed national director for the NAACP's various branches. In 1957, Ella moved to Atlanta, where she was one of the founders of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, or SCLC, which was led by Martin Luther King Jr. The goal of the SCLC was to redeem the soul of America. They worked to accomplish this through nonviolent resistance. In 1960, Ella left the SCLC to form the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC. SNCC was formed to give younger blacks who felt their issues were not being heard and addressed more of a voice in the movement. Like the SCLC, SNCC also started out with a nonviolent resistance agenda, but many within the organization soon grew impatient. They felt the movement wasn't making progress fast enough, and a pacifist approach was not the way to make that happen. Unfortunately, this created friction between Martin Luther King Jr. and SNCC. That's when Ella Baker stepped in. She encouraged those in SNCC who were disgruntled to look at the bigger picture. She explained that what they were trying to achieve went way beyond just integration. The broader goal was social change. Ella recommended that SNCC members view Dr. King's principle of nonviolence not as a be-all and end-all, but rather as more of a political tactic.
Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee was more politically oriented. Part and parcel of the initial SNCC efforts was to not only go in for voter registration, but for political participation.
Right up until her death in 1986, Ella Josephine Baker continued to fight for civil rights, voters' rights, and women's rights. She died on her 83rd birthday in Harlem, New York. That was her home since 1927.
I have always thought that what is needed is the development of people who are interested not in being leaders as much as in developing leadership in others.
From the 1930s through the turbulent 1960s, her tireless work behind the scenes helped to define the civil rights movement as much more than just protesting for the right to vote, own a home, or even sit at a lunch counter. A strong and determined leader, Ella Baker saw the fight for civil rights as a struggle for humanity as a whole.
This has been African American History is American History.
African American History is American History. Copyright H.C. Kearsley, 2025.